Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, where it looks like there are people that are still coming in, so we're going to give it about a few minutes. So we'll start at 3:02. All right, thank you all. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, Math Solutions, Results-Oriented Strategies for Teaching Math to Adults. My name is Nicole Caban, and I am the Education and Training Coordinator for the Florida Literacy Coalition. Before I get started, I'd like to show you a couple of tools at your disposal for the webinar itself. If you look at your control panel, which should be on the right-hand side of the screen, you can drag that and move that anywhere you want on your screen. You can minimize it if you'd like. There's a red arrow at the top left side of your control panel. You can press that if you'd like to dock it, and then you can press it again to bring it out again. There's also a questions box on your control panel. So if you have any questions for the presenter, go ahead and type it into that questions box. If you have any technical questions, you can type that in as well. I will be answering all the technical questions privately, but if it has anything to do with the content or it's a question for the presenter, we will actually be taking most of the questions at the end of the webinar today, okay? So if you don't hear us answer your question, just hang tight. That question will be resolved by the end. I'd like to point your attention to the handouts section. That's going to be towards the bottom of your control panel. There you should see one handout, and that is going to be today's presentation. If you click that, you can download that, and you can follow along if you'd like. You'll be receiving this in a follow-up email. So don't feel pressure to download it before the end of the webinar. There are actually quite a few handouts given to us by the presenter today, and those are actually going to be in the chat. I sent a message to everyone with a link to hightail.com. And that's going to have all the resources and handouts provided by the presenter. So that also is going to be coming in a follow-up email. So if you don't want to, or you're having trouble downloading those files today, don't worry about it. You'll be getting that in a follow-up email tomorrow. All right. So with all that out of the way, I'd like to introduce our presenter. Rebecca is a self-proclaimed technology junkie. And in addition to having a decade of experience teaching math in adult education, Rebecca has always been interested in technology in the classroom. Rebecca loves finding new and fun resources to utilize with students and fellow teachers. She spends her days teaching ABE and GED classes and her nights supporting teachers as a coordinator. And she finds any opportunity to help fellow adult education teachers a true joy. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Rebecca.
Okay, hi there everybody, and thank you for joining me today. I am going to, if you feel good about it and can type in that chat box, if you can hear me, that would be a great help just so I know that I'm coming through. So I am, like Nicole said, I have worked in ABE GED for about 10 years, and I have worked with adults all of that time. And I have also served as the coordinator and a support. So what is one really awesome thing that I love to do is integrate technology. That's definitely my thing. And I am going to take you through a bunch of different things for the math today. I have been lucky enough to teach math for most of my teaching career, but I've definitely had an experiences teaching all the subjects. So today I am going to jump in and out of the PowerPoint. I'm going to show you some things live, and so we'll just go ahead and get started. So you have my email here. I'm sharing the PowerPoint, and I'm going to go through the resources that I'm sharing with you at the end of the presentation. So a couple things that we're going to discuss today. I want to talk about the GED Math Test scope, the most missed questions on the GED Math, useful web resources, print resources, and some math manipulatives that I like to use in my classroom and how I use them. If you have any questions and you'd like to type those in the chat pod, I will try to address those questions at the end of the session. Okay, so just talking about the GED Math Test, again, one of the things that I do on my team is analyze a lot of the most important parts of the GED. If you look at the standards from the Florida Department of Education, you find that there are a tremendous number of standards. I think the math test, for example, has 80 different standards, and some of those standards are hefty enough that you would not be able to teach them in one day. So what we try to do in our classrooms is really drill into some of those most important topics, and we try to pay a lot of attention to our students and what they are saying when they're coming back from the test, and we try to figure out through that process what are the most important things for us to teach, because we've all realized that we can't teach every single thing. So this that you're looking at, this chart, is basically taken from GED.com. So of course, GED Testing Service is the company that manufactures the math test. And these are the things, the categories that they list that are on the test. And I have highlighted in red some of the most important ones. So basically the GED, the scope of the GED is Algebra 1. So if you're teaching anything related to Algebra 1, you're doing the right thing. If you're a tutor or if you're working with small groups, no matter what you're doing, if it's in the Algebra 1 bracket, you're in the right place. Within the basic math section, you'll see that we have a ton of different subjects in there. The number one most important in the basic math arena is going to be problem solving, and that is going to be word problems. So it's going to be heavy-duty word problems all throughout the GED test. Within the geometry section, the typical question is going to be finding side lengths when given the area or perimeter. You're also going to find compound type area questions, and then most typically on the geometry section, we'll end up seeing 3D shapes instead of 2D shapes. So you can't just stop by teaching your students area and perimeter. They really need to understand how to use volume and surface area formulas. And then within those formulas, they need to make sure that they know how to find, for example, the height of a cone rather than just only finding the volume. So if I give you the volume, you need to find the height. And by the way, I'm going to go through this more specifically in just a moment. Within the basic algebra section, if you ask me what's the most important section, I would say it's the basic algebra section. Linear equations and real-world problems, inequalities, and word-to-symbol translations. So I'm going to try to show you one of the sample GED tests in a moment, and you will see that almost the entire test is word problems, and you will see a tremendous amount of the test is going to revolve around a very deep understanding of the meaning of the numbers, symbols, and variables of equations and inequalities. So I'm going to try to show you plenty of examples of that type of thing, and so that you'll be clear about what you need to teach on that. Just solving equations is not enough. Most of the questions will be word problems. And then if you're talking about graphs and functions, the one most commonly heard word when a student comes back from a GED math test, especially if they didn't pass it, is slope. There were 3 slope questions, and I didn't know. Slope, slope, slope. Everybody's talking about slope. So knowing how to find slope from 2 points, find slope on a graph, and then generally graph-align in slope-intercept form are going to be some of the most important there. And I'm going to get into a little bit more detail about that in just a moment. So in this slide, I would like to show you a test that I have actually taken, and I'm going to cut over to the internet to show you this link at the bottom here. There are sample tests online that are only 10 questions long, and it is my recommendation that if you are a teacher working with adult ed or GED students or a tutor, that you might want to check out these tests, take them yourself, and see the style of the questioning, because that is going to be one of the most difficult things about the GED. When the test changed in 2014, one of the most significant changes about the test was the style of the questioning. So instead of asking explicit questions, where a student must complete 1 or 2 steps to find an answer, what the new test is doing is layering 6 to 7 skills into one question. So our younger students that saw that transition in their standardized testing in elementary, middle, and high school, they are more used to it. Our older adults, who are maybe in their 30s or older, are not necessarily used to this style of questioning, and it's very difficult for students to unpack these. So this is a test that I took out of curiosity, and I made sure that I got every question wrong. So you can see that the score is 113, and that is how many points I earned by getting every question wrong. So I wanted to just show you that, just so that you have a little bit of an understanding of how the scoring works. You need 145 points to pass the GED. The test is out of 200. Typically, in all the students that I've seen since 2014, most of them are scoring somewhere between 145 and 150 on the math test. So we always are encouraging our students to just pass it. We say we need 145 and that's it. We're not shooting for the moon here. We want passing scores, and we are not trying to really encourage them to try to worry if they're not getting 200s, because we really don't see scores that high on the test. So if you look at my little tip here in purple on the bottom right hand part of your screen, I wanted to look at some research-based practices, and amongst instructional strategies with the largest effect size, so this is research-based, reinforcing effort and providing recognition is top 3 in terms of the impact it'll have on your students or the people that you're working with. And we have decided on our team of GED teachers that practice testing is probably the most important thing that we do. And within that practice testing, we are constantly encouraging them as much as we possibly can. So if I give a student a practice test and they get even a 40 to 50% on some of the tests that I'm giving them, that is typically showing that they are ready to pass the GED. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that scoring throughout the presentation, but we're not going for 80 to 90% on the math test necessarily. If you want me to be perfectly honest, I think that a passing percentage on the GED math test is probably somewhere in the 30% range. That is, you know, they put these scale scores in so that you can't really figure it out, but I can tell you based upon the data I've seen in the classroom and looking at students that have gone to take the test and passed it, I think that if a student is able to score 40 to 50% on a practice test, then that's about right. They're probably going to pass the GED test. And we always make a big deal if they do even halfway decent on a practice test, and we always want them to practice testing as much as possible. I've had plenty of students that have graduated who really all they did was practice tests. They hardly even studied. So I'm going to just switch screens momentarily, and I'm going to just try to pull up that website just so I can show you Let's see if I can get out of here. So I can show you this website briefly. They just changed it, but I do have it linked on the bottom of that slide. So you will have access to the PowerPoint, and I'm going to go through a bunch of other resources too, but this is the old website. Here it goes, pops up the new website. So these are sample tests that you can take, and I do recommend that if you're working with GED students that you take these. They're only 10 questions. So I'm going to pop into the math one, and I'm just going to show you how you might be able to use this. I use this with students frequently. I use it with them to see if they're ready, and I also use it with them for the ones that might be a little overzealous in their speed. I use it to try to show them that they might need to just give it a little bit more time before they go and take their practice test. So you can go into this for free, and again, it's 10 questions. And I'm just going to click through just so you can see the length of some of these questions. You see an inequality question here, but it's not even solving inequalities. It's just a long word problem and matching words to the inequalities. So you have the word to symbol translations there. Another word problem here. You can see a very long word problem here where they have to interpret a chart. They have to then graph. They have to read all these words and unpack them. In the next one, they have to generate an equation through clicking and dragging. After reading a chart, interpreting words. So to me, this is the big challenge of teaching for the GED test for some of the students, again, aged 30 or older, that didn't necessarily see these types of questions with this type of complexity when they were going through school. So I just wanted to quickly show you this sample test. And again, I think it's very easy to take, and then you can click here on answer explanation. After you answer the question, you can click on answer explanation, and it'll tell you if you're right or you're wrong. And I just teach my students how to do that. So more on that shortly, but that's what we're looking at when we're talking about the GED. I'm going to talk a little bit more in some of the print resources about what other practice tests I use. Okay, so briefly, I'm going to try to get through these most missed questions kind of quickly. I am sharing you the I am sharing with you the documents from which I pulled this information. If you've ever had a chance to see Susan and Bonnie Goonan, who are some presenters that come out from Florida IPDA, they presented this. I pulled this from a couple different places, but if you're a tutor especially and you don't have a tremendous amount of contact time with your student, or if you're working in any kind of setting where you're not going to see a student every day and you know you won't have time to teach everything to the student, I think this can really help to show you what might be some of the more important areas. And this comes from a study done by GED Testing Service, and they're the ones that have determined which areas were missed the most on the math test. So this comes directly from the GED. The first area is going to be the quantitative reasoning, and this is going to be dealing with area and perimeter. And a lot of the questions here are going to be composite shapes and also the finding side lengths when you're given area or perimeter. So it's not always just plug into the formula. Sometimes it's reading that formula backwards. So the students need to be able to do that. And I pulled an example directly from that sample test. In this question, this is a wrap that's around a tree that is essentially the shape of a rectangle. And from that, you need to be able to interpret that that's a rectangle and answer questions based upon the square footage of this wrap. So it's something where students really have to have a deep understanding of shapes and a deep understanding of the formulas to be able to answer some of these questions. This is not a mile wide and an inch deep type of thing. The students really need to understand the formulas, and they really need to be able to unpack word problems, and those are kind of essential skills to be able to get through this style of questioning. Okay, next area is going to be graphing related to a coordinate plane, graphing equations, and graphing two variable linear equations. Again, the most notable word any student says after they come back from that math test, whether or not they passed it, is slope. and we've determined there could be up to 3 slope questions based upon what students have said to us. So they really need to be able to understand that slope-intercept form. They need to be able to click on a graph to locate a point, and they really need to understand how that slope-intercept form equation works. The next area is going to be scale factors. This may not be a huge area in terms of number of questions, but I think this is going to be typically one of those things that is there, at least in one question. So they need to be able to compare, for example, similar triangles, similar rectangles, similar shapes like that. And they also need to know a lot about simple interest, tax, markups, discounts, and typically that is going to all be the types of percentage questions that you're going to need to answer on the GED. Okay, next is going to be equations, inequalities, and then on top of equations, we're talking about quadratic equations, which again will be one question typically, but there will be numerous questions involving either linear equations or inequalities. So if there was one thing that you could start with, if there was one thing you could start teaching, it would be equations. When I tried to do, we tried to do stand-up instruction daily for an entire year. I was teaching equations over and over because as I was getting new students, I knew that this was one of the most important things because almost all the questions are related back to equations. And if you look back at that sample test, you're going to see that 4 out of 10 questions are either equation, expression, or inequality questions, where the answers are going to be either an equation, an expression, or an inequality. So the students really have to understand what it means when we put numbers and letters together, what those variables are doing, and how to extract the meaning of a variable from a word problem. Okay, I think this is the last group, and this is kind of the same thing. Linear expressions as word to symbol translations and linear equations and the same thing. I have a lot of different examples there. Again, this bottom in the blue and white box, that's how the GED looks, by the way, the same thing that I just showed you on the online sample test. This is how the GED looks. So I always tell my students, you know, this is how it looks, this is how it feels, same drop-down menu, same click and drags, so that they can get used to it before they go take their real test. So again, this is just another thing that is saying equations are essential. And you can see over here on the right-hand side that there are a ton of answers that are going to be written as expressions or as equations or as inequalities. And that is something that students really need to understand, how to read these words and extract an equation. And I always tell my students, if you look at these answer choices, they're so similar to each other. Sometimes it's just the difference of a plus sign or a minus sign between two answers. So they really have to understand how to answer, because if they just change a positive to a negative, then they could get the answer wrong. Okay, so now I'm going to take you over to the next screen and I'm going to preview some of the web resources. So technology is my thing, and this is also a free way to get a ton of different practice problems. So I am going to show you some print resources also, but those are going to require purchase, and all of these web resources are 100% free. So I'm just going to take you through some of these. And again, I have my little research-based strategy up in the top right. Amongst the instructional strategies with the largest impact on achievement, homework and practice is top 4. So really what I find is that in working with students, it's worth it to take the time to let them practice a skill. I always tell students the GED test is about the number of points that you earn, not about the number of points that you don't earn. It's not about the questions that you miss. It's about the questions that you get right. So if you know how to do something, you have to take the time to get it right. And I have to learn that as a teacher also, because sometimes I feel like there are 80 math strategies and I need to teach them all. Instead of thinking that way, I think I need to hone in on the essential math strategies, and I need my students to have a deep understanding of those, because I am not going to make it through those 80 standards in one school year anyway, especially not in the adult and environment, which I assume many of you are dealing with. A turnover of students, you get new students, or you're tutoring and you're not seeing a student every day, and you lose students throughout the year. So in that type of environment, there's no way that 80 standards are going to get accomplished. So I try to get my students to have a deep understanding of the standards that I can cover. So I'm going to switch, I'm going to switch screens again, and I'm going to go back and show you some of these web resources. If it will let me out of here. Okay, here we go. All right, so I haven't exactly put these in order. So I want to just go ahead and shamelessly plug the Florida Literacy Coalition website. I worked with them this summer to help develop this, and I can tell you that this web page has been aligned to the GED standards, and the way that I know that is because I did that. So this is a math video resource page. On this page, we have a tracking sheet that has a list of every video that is on this website, so students could watch the videos independently and check off when they have completed them. But also, what's really cool about this website is that it's chunked into basically the 5 areas of the GED. The foundations area is kind of prerequisite skills, maybe more of an ABE level there. So I'm going to take you into the basic algebra, and I would definitely emphasize the basic algebra, the graphs and functions, and the geometry section. So I'm going to take you into there and just show you, we've got basically a ton of different videos, primarily from Khan Academy, that are standards aligned to the GED. So this is a great resource that students can use independently. And I have put one sample lesson plan for using this website with your students, whether you are a teacher or a tutor. I put a sample lesson plan in the resources that I'm going to share with you. So you have all the different content areas that's going to include a bunch of different videos. And then you have a quiz that is going to be written GED style, and it's an interactive quiz where students can come in and click their answers and submit and get immediate feedback on their score, how many they got right. They can take the quiz again, and there's just a ton of different review questions for each one of the content areas. So I really like this website because what I tell my students that like to study independently, and I know some of them love to learn from YouTube, is YouTube is a huge resource. It's got millions of videos, and you don't need all of those millions to learn the math that you need on the GED. So what I really like about this website that we've created here and these web pages is that we have created something that is specifically for adults, specifically for the GED test. So there's not too many resources out there by comparison to K-12 type of environment. Okay, so if you're a tutor or a teacher and you need a ton of examples to review with your student and you would like a web-based product, IXL is this really awesome site where they have a ton, you can never run out. They have a ton of math problems. So what I'm doing, what I typically do is I will either pick a level based upon a grade level, which I don't necessarily try to emphasize that to my adults, but I will either try to match it to their testing that they came in with, if I have an indicator of what functioning level they might be on. Or I typically stick between 6th grade and Algebra 1. Again, you don't really need to go much further than that. And what this is just a ton of practice questions that you can view online. So I can find any questions here, and I'm just going to pick the coordinate plane, for example. And students can then go in and answer these online. Now, there is a paid version of this program, So it's asking the coordinates of point C, so then I can type it in. I'm going to go ahead and type it incorrectly, and then you're going to see that I can submit and I get immediate feedback. And it's going to explain to me what the correct answer is. So this is something that's great to let students practice independently. A lot of times I will review a lesson with my students and then I will have them go to their own computers to practice this. If I was working in a tutoring environment and I had one laptop, I can use that one laptop with a student just to have constantly generated practice problems. The only thing about the free version of this site is that it will let you practice 10 questions, and then it wants you to pay for a membership. If you close the web page and clear your browser history, you can practice 10 more. So I've never paid for this, and we did look into paying for it and we didn't decide that we needed to. So this is a great resource and you'll never run out of things here. And then along those same lines, we have CUDA Software. .com, which is something that every math teacher under the sun knows about pretty much. So this has a ton of great worksheets that you can just click on and print. So you've got a lot of great resources in there for Algebra 1 and Pre-Algebra, which are the only sections that I would typically use for the GED, maybe just do a little bit of the volume and surface area from the geometry section. But these are ready to go, ready to be downloaded or printed. They've got the answers there, so it's a very convenient resource. And CUDA software, I will say, is typically more for my higher level or GED students because the lowest is going to be pre-algebra there. Common Core Sheets is another great resource that has basically the same thing, but you'll see over here on the left-hand side, we've got down to addition. I mean, so we have a lot more ABE worksheets here, and again, they're 100% free and free to download. So if I just select a worksheet, it'll allow me to bring that worksheet up. I can save it, I can print it, I can do anything except for edit it, and I've got my answers. So a lot of us that teach ABE, which is adult basic ed, for those of you that don't know, we designate students below a 9th grade level as ABE students. So when I say that, that's what I mean, like some of the lower functioning students. A lot of us that teach for the GED program use these two websites heavily. Okay, one of the next websites that I want to show you, and I'm going to show you some of the manipulatives that I have in the classroom, but if you want a virtual version of manipulatives, you have a lot of choices here. For example, here's your algebra tiles. I use those from time to time. You have colored markers, you have base 10 blocks. There are a ton of different manipulatives here, and you can also print these manipulatives. So if you lay a bunch of them out, like for example, if you wanted tangrams for some reason, or you wanted to make a set of them, you can print these, and whatever you've got on this screen will print nicely. And the printing is somewhere, here we go, print screen, you'll see down at the tools at the bottom. So if I try to print that, it will give me a nice page of whatever I just created. So if you just wanted to throw a bunch of resources on there and then try to print them out, you can create your own manipulatives for free. And some of this is really kiddie, but there's some things that you can do. Let me just clear this. There's some things you can do that look really kiddie, but you can also use these just to project on the board, or if you're in a tutoring setting, just show on your laptop to one person. You know, I can just throw this on the screen and say, okay, so we've got these bears and they're in a canoe, and if one of them falls out, what's the probability of it being a blue bear? And they can answer me, and then I can say, okay, well now what's the probability of it being a blue bear? So I just like these visual manipulatives that I can project onto the screen. I find it to be a little bit more interesting than just the old-fashioned chalkboard, whiteboard type of thing, especially because the students really do need to start adapting to using a computer and answering math questions. because that is what they have to do on the GED. And I don't know how many times I've seen a student look at a negative sign on a computer screen and then copy it down on their scrap paper without a negative sign. So I need them to have that interaction of looking in front of their face at a screen, copying and then getting information and then copying it down on scrap paper to do the math. So I try to incorporate that just because they need to get used to it. And arcademyx is the last one that I threw in. In this website, you have a bunch of different games that you can use. This is really kiddie, but you'll find that your adults will get into it. And I tried this in class one time. I really thought they were not going to go for it. And then they did, and then I showed it to them, and then the next day they started playing by themselves. So basically, I'll let it make sound. Basically, they're just little races that you can play, and what I like about this is that it's got that timed anxiety built in. So when you click play, I'm just going to type my name, whatever. When I click play, it's going to start a race, and then I need to get moving. So I'm going to play this for 3 seconds to show you. And what I liked about this with students is the ones that, I won't talk over this. All right, so I have to answer. If I get it wrong, okay, so you get the point. What I liked about that with students, even though it's a kiddie thing, really designed for kids, is that I always tell my students I get a lot of anxiety when I play those games because I have to be fast. And I know that I'm probably playing against elementary school students, and it drives me crazy to think that I might be falling behind my elementary school students. So, so I have my own anxiety, but they need to get over that speed anxiety because they're taking time tests. So I don't mind when they're dealing with that anxiety because they need to get over that timing. And when I did it with students as a group, you know, the one that just wants to sit there and slack off and be really slow and lazy and look at their phone, that's not going to work during this game. So you've got some algebra in there, so I just kind of like that as a fun fun little kind of brain break, great for a Friday afternoon. So you will have a copy of this PowerPoint, and it's got all the links on it. Okay, so we talked about these different web resources. I'm going to talk briefly about these print resources. I don't know if all of you have the ability to purchase through whatever organization you're working with, but I work with a lot of adult ed and GED teachers, and these are some of the favorites. For your lower level students, so those that are, let's say, on like below a 9th grade level of functioning, we love this Achieving Tape Success series from McGraw-Hill. This middle one is a consumable book that we really like from McGraw-Hill, where students can write in these or not. Your choice. And then we like this Steck-Von TABE Fundamentals series. They just have a ton of different practice problems in them. And our #1 complaint about any math resource is typically that it doesn't have enough practice problems in it. So these are some of the books that we really like that I really like in particular, that have a lot of resources. A lot of practice problems. For the GED level, the higher level students, which by the way, we've figured out the old tape scoring, you know, it went by grade levels. So 6th grade or higher, we decided students could hang with us on the math. If they were functioning below the equivalent of a 6th grade level, then we knew that they needed a lot more foundation. If they were at least on a 6th grade level, then we pushed them up to that GED math because we knew that we wouldn't have them forever. We needed to keep moving forward with them. We couldn't take 5 years with them to build in a ton of fundamental skills or foundation skills. We needed to just kind of hone in on those core skills and try to get them through the test, because we've seen that in our adult education programs, student turnover, student transience, and you know, the coming and going of new students is a real barrier, and just generally student attendance on a daily basis is a huge barrier to us teaching in a traditional style. So we're always trying to hone in. For the higher level ones, which again, I say 6th grade or higher, we really love from New Readers Press these Score Boost consumable books. They have some great GED level questions in them. The Kaplan Big Book is what we all call this one. It doesn't matter if it says 2014, 15, 16, 17, or 18 because they keep changing that number and charging you again for the same book. But we all love this one. This is pretty favorite book amongst GED teachers. So if you're going to buy a set of books, I would say this one is great. It's got practice tests in there, in the front and in the back. And a lot of times we will use those practice tests. And like I said, 40 to 50% on the math is about right. So if they're scoring in that range, then probably if they went to take the GED test, they're going to pass it. So we just try to give them a couple rounds of practice tests. Another one that we like is McGraw-Hill's Common Core Basics. Now, the majority that we use these, I will admit, is for the tests, the pre-test and post-test in this book that we use as practice tests. And again, if they can put up 40 to 50% on this book, 40 to 50% on a test in this book, I think that they're ready for the GED, and then I try to move them towards the official practice test offered by GED.com. Okay, so math manipulatives, I'm going to, again, switch screens. Let me go back there just to read that. Research says that non-linguistic representations are in the top 5 of most impactful strategies. There are a bunch of different kinds of manipulatives that I use, and I'm going to switch screens to show them to you. I use those manipulatives for hands-on, and then I use these foldables. So I'm going to switch screens to show all of this to you. But I just want to read this one too. One of the the top 2 most impactful strategies for student achievement is summarizing and note-taking. So I'm going to just show you a couple of things that I have. Now, I'm going to plug Ronald Cruz, who works for Florida IPDA. He is one of the best math trainers I have ever experienced in my life, and I have seen a couple different trainers out there. Ron is so intelligent, he's so math-minded, and he's really got it going on. He was my inspiration for these boxes that I have created, and you may not have the funding to create this, but I'm going to show you a couple things that you might be able to get for pretty cheap or come up with a way of doing it practically for free. So Ron inspired me to create these boxes, and some of the things I'm going to show you are from Ron. I just keep scissors in the box. I keep these clear clipboards because I can write on one side of them with an expo marker, and then I can put a worksheet on the other side, and then you'll just see that I have a bunch of pens and other things and expo markers in there. So one of my favorite things in the box is going to be that clear clipboard. You can see I've put a graphing paper under it, so I can have students write on these, and then they can complete whatever paper is on the other side. So we don't have to draw a graph 500 times. We can just keep using the same graph to practice. So I really love these clear clipboards, and also I really like these paddles, or like little mini whiteboards. I find that students just are engaged in using markers. And also what I like about these is that if a student makes a mistake, they can erase it, and then they can examine their error and try to fix it. So I'll have students solve these problems on the whiteboards, and then show me while we're in class, so that we're constantly practicing. If you don't have the whiteboards but you have the markers, most surfaces that you're going to find in any school, and I don't know if you're a tutor, if you're willing to go do this in the middle of a library or a center where you or wherever you're tutoring, but in most places you can write and erase with expo markers on these smooth surfaces. So I was actually using that technique for a while when I didn't have these whiteboards. So if you really are being cheap, again, I just find my students will write on the whiteboards because they are happy to use the marker. And for some reason, it's more fun than using a pen or a pencil on a white piece of paper. I have these algebra tiles, which I ordered. These are pretty cheap-ish because you get like 30 sets. They come out to be like $1 a set. And you can use these in the same way that I use these little colored dots. And what these little dots are great for is showing integers. So let me just try to show you here a little bit better. I can show positive numbers and negative numbers, and then we can compare and see if we add, for example, positive 2 to negative 3, what is our final result? And then we can see how the numbers will cancel when they're positive and negative, and we get a -1 as a final answer. So I really like these colored dots. Now you can order these online. I have created these and I had my students glue them together. So I found a circular hole punch. You could also just cut out squares, which I think would be easier if you don't have a circular hole punch, and then you can get a student who is bored to glue all this together for you. And there you go. I mean, I've made most of these out of paper for free instead of buying them. But these counting type manipulatives to show positives and negatives are really great, and they've helped me a lot with integers. Again, Ronald Cruz, I got that from him. He is really awesome when it comes to manipulatives. You can do the same thing with the algebra tiles if you buy a set of algebra tiles, because you do have the same red and yellow in these small ones that you can use, and you can just do those. And again, students are, sometimes you'll find some students are way more interested when they can touch it. I remember that I had this class that just had 2 students in it, and it was a male and a female. The female was always better than the guy and faster when it came to solving equations on paper. And then I showed that male student how to solve equations by using algebra tiles, like maybe this equation says 3x = 1, for example. Okay, and when I showed him, that's probably a really bad example. I need to get more, more of my tiles out. Okay, here we go. 3x = 3. How about that? When I showed him how to use these algebra tiles, it's like these equations just totally clicked in his head, and he loved it, and she hated it. So it was just a really clear signal to me that some students are really going to respond well to these tactile things, and it's great to incorporate those, especially for those students. And you never know who's going to respond to what. There are a ton of videos online on YouTube that show exactly how to use algebra tiles. So if this is not really your thing, but you want to challenge yourself to teach it, then you can watch those videos on YouTube, because there's they very clearly explain how to use them. Another thing that I got that I like are these number lines. Let me see if I can zoom out here. It's not really showing them, but I have these laminated number lines. So we can draw number lines on there. We have some number lines that are labeled. And again, these are all things that are in the box that my students use regularly. And creating the boxes was very helpful to me, because it's just, I know everything's in there. I don't have to be distributing supplies all the time. Okay, so before we move on, I'm just going to show you a couple different math foldables. I will tell you, I will share with you that I was recently reading an article that talked about teaching adults math, and one of the things in the article talked about teacher attitude about teaching in a certain style. And I know that there are times that I want to go really quickly through something, and I think it should be easy, so I just want to move on because I'm trying to teach as much as I possibly can. Sometimes I have to remind myself that students need a very deep understanding of what we are teaching them. And what I like about foldables is that not only is it artsy and colorful for some students that are really into that, but it also is a very slow way of note-taking. And it's that slowness of it allows students more time to process it. So this is a foldable that I was recently using with students talking about the order of operations. I find that it almost doesn't matter how you create the foldable. It's just a matter of slowly looking at each part of this. So we had, for example, exponents on the inside. We had an example of what an exponent even looks like, and then on the entire inside of this part, we were going step by step and actually solving something that had order of operations in it. There are a ton, if you Google math foldables, there are a ton of ideas on Google of different foldables that you can make if you're not creative or you're not interested in this type of thing. But I can tell you that note-taking is so important. And if I just write down notes on the board, a lot of times students won't copy them. Or if I'm in a tutoring environment, a lot of times I don't think of it as a class setting, so I don't think of it as a time for me to have a student take notes. But it is a time for them to take notes because they are going to need to slowly process the information. And I find that that slowness is important. I do this one, it's not really so much of a foldable, but it's on the place value chart. And then what I usually do with this is I make it pretty large. Usually bigger than this, but I made it smaller so you could actually see it. But then if we are talking about place value, I can have them write, and I have them right on the desk because I don't care. Okay, I have them write, and then I can say, well, what place value is that 8 in? And then they can actually see how it matches with the place, and they can use their own place value chart to read. What place value is the 3 in? It's in the hundredths place, and then they can actually read it on their own chart, and I have them writing either on the whiteboards or on the table. So it's just a way that they're slowing down that processing, which I find is almost never a bad thing with my adults, because very frequently they need to slow down. They won't tell you that they don't understand it because they don't want to be embarrassed, but they need to slow down because they need time to get it. Here's another one that has integers rules on it with examples. It kind of doesn't matter what type of math you're teaching in this way. You can kind of make a foldable out of anything. This I started with it folding, but really it's just one page. But it slows down that note taking and it makes them take those notes, which is really important. Okay, moving back to my other screen here. We're going to go through this last thing. I want to show you one more thing. So for those of you that haven't looked, GED.com is going to have a ton of information about the test there for you. And within GED.com, students will do everything, including taking what's called the GED Ready, which is the official GED practice test. If you're a teacher or a tutor, these tests are only $6 a piece. They are half of the length of the real test, and they take anywhere from 35 minutes to 95 minutes to complete them, depending on which subject you're doing. But I highly recommend that you take these because it's really important to understand the style of questioning on the GED. If you don't want to spend $6, then one of the other things that you can do, again, is just look at the sample test, and I have given you this link on the PowerPoint. You have this link here, but just look at the style of questioning, because one of the main things that you need to understand is the depth of the questions on the GED, because you really need to push your students as far as you can in terms of their ability to unpack a complex 5 or 6 skill word problem. If I can just scroll out, if you just look through, this is a 10-question test. I'm going to scroll backwards. You just see how many of the questions are word problems. And they're not even short word problems always. Sometimes it's 2 and 3 paragraphs. So I just would recommend just taking these tests so that you can really see the scope of what they're dealing with on the GED test. So finally, before I start fielding any questions, if you have them, I'm just going to show you the resources that I've put together, and again, Nicole's given you a link. Okay, so just a quick review of the resources. Now, they're not going to look exactly like this whenever you retrieve them, but basically this is what's going on. Our team of math teachers created some common assessments. at that time we were dealing with a TABE test, so we're getting the pre-test scores from our students that were chunked by grade level. If you are a tutor and you're not working with an environment where you have test scores for students, then I would say, well, if you think the student is functioning 6th grade level or below, or 6th grade level or above, you've those are the divisions that we've made. But in here, I have put a ton of the common assessments that we have created, and these are just if you wanted to tutor towards an assessment type thing, you have a bunch of quizzes in here that you can use with the students that you're working with, or if you're teaching a class and you'd like to have like a weekly quiz, these quizzes were typically set up for us to be teaching for about 1 or 2 weeks and then get to a quiz. So we've created these quizzes. So you have the lower level quizzes and you have the higher level quizzes in there, and they're editable, so you can edit those. So that's what I have in the assessments. Again, I don't know if you'll actually see them in folders, but you'll see what they are. I put a blank calculator in there so that you can review the key buttons with your students, and I've got the key buttons identified there. That's pretty important. So the GED is 5 questions, no calculator. And then they stop that part of the test, and then they continue the test, and they do 32 questions with a calculator. So even if you have a student that can't add, if they can solve and unpack word problems, they can still probably get through the test. Now, if they really can't add at all, they might be too low functioning to solve word problems, but we certainly have a lot of students that have trouble multiplying. We make sure that they know how to use this calculator, and this is an example of the TI-30XS, which is that GED calculator. I would expect you might have seen it before. This is what the whole calculator looks like. This is available at like Office Depot for 15 bucks. You should be able to find this for $15 somewhere. If you have access to purchase them for your student use, that would be great, because this is the calculator they get on the GED. So you have that in there. You have this list of web resources that I have developed for a different training that I've done. So if you're really interested in technology and you want to learn more about, if you want to learn more about some different resources that are good to use with adults, I've got them listed in here for you. You also have my email at the top there if you have any questions about any of those resources. So you have that list in there. That was developed with an ESOL teacher for any of you that might be working with ESOL. You got the PowerPoint for today. You have a list of mobile apps, which is kind of the same as the list of tech resources. It's just if you've got those students that are only using their phones, some of these apps may help you. You have 2 documents regarding the most missed questions. So I kind of started the presentation talking about those. And again, what I think is important about these documents is it's really going to help you hone in. So if you're a tutor and you're working in one of those environments where you're not getting your students every day, this may help you to really see what the main things you might want to teach are. I also have another document talking about the no calculator section. So for example, students need to be able to, sorry, I don't know why I'm getting this pop-up. Students need to be able to execute exponents like squares and sometimes cubes in certain situations without a calculator. So it's just going to give you an overview of the types of things, like look here, we have a square here or a square root, that students will need to be aware of and how they can do them without a calculator for those first 5 questions that they'll need to do on the GED test. Okay, I have that sample lesson there for the math playlist. This is going to go with the Florida Literacy Coalition math resource page, and in there there's a worksheet for students to do a video review and talk about what they have actually learned from watching one of the videos so that they're engaged in it and not just listening. Here I have a TABE 11 and 12 skill breakdown. So for those of you that are not using the TABE test, if you're working with a school, you probably are, but if you're working as a tutor, you might not be working with students that are getting tested. But the TABE is a test of adult basic education, and it is what we use for adult students that are interested in the GED classes as a pretest and as a progression test. But this has a big breakdown of everything that's on the reading, math, and language test of the TABE. So if you really had no idea what kind of math to teach to help your students gain the foundational skills that they need for the GED, this is going to give you a real good idea, because it basically has a breakdown of the adult education math, basically. So this skill breakdown is a good resource. And then these last three breakdowns are, again, developed by a team of math teachers that I work with. And what we did is we looked at the GED math standards and we translated them into real language that we could actually understand. So if you look down the left-hand column of this document, it has the basic math principles that need to be taught. If you look in the middle column, it's got a list of how we plan to teach them. So for example, if it says, let me look for a more complex topic here. Okay, if you look at understanding percents and decimals, we're talking a little bit more clearly in the middle column about what we are teaching regarding percents and decimals. So you can see the breakdown. We developed this in an effort to create sort of an order of instruction or a blueprint, more like what they would have in the K-12 world. So we've got two breakdowns. And on the breakdowns, you will also see sometimes it references the quizzes that I have shared with you. So you can see what you might be able to teach before you give your students a quiz. So if you wanted to start chunking your teaching or your tutoring, you could make little chunks, and then you have these quizzes that you can give to your students that are already created, and I have shared those with you. And then the last column is going to have a list of resources that may be useful to you to some degree if you see like CUDA and it's a square root worksheet, but other than that, I'm not exactly sure if that last column would be that useful to you, but I just really wanted to share that middle column for you, and well, the first two columns really, because it really does break down what the GED standards actually mean. So that is pretty much it for me. I'm going to put some contact information here. And I'm going to take a moment to see if we have any questions. And let me see if I can answer any of these. I'm not sure we have any questions. So if any of you have any questions that you'd like to ask at this time, please type them in the questions box, and I will address those. And if not, then I would just want to thank you for joining me. You have my email on the screen. You have my email in the PowerPoint that has been shared with through Nicole. She has shared that PowerPoint with you. So if you need to contact me and have any questions in the future, I'm more than happy to answer your questions. So please do let me know.
Great. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for this presentation. I do want to give you all a reminder. Like Rebecca said, the handouts, they're actually going to be in the chat. I sent it to everyone. So if you want to download that now, that's fine. But I will be actually sending out an email to everyone tomorrow. Actually, it's going to be Julie, our new intern. She's going to be sending that out to everyone. It's going to have the link for the recording. It's going to have all the handouts plus a certificate of completion in that email. And I just want to remind everyone, please do the survey. We use your feedback and we make changes to our webinars and what we offer because of your feedback. If you guys love Rebecca, we will be having her, we'll beg her to come and do other things for us. So yeah, please do the survey that you get tomorrow. Rebecca, it looks like we do have one question here.
Yes, I see that.
Yes.
So David, you're asking if the GED test is done on computers. Yes, it is. And I'm going to switch back just to show you that practice test again. If you look at that website, and I think that this there's a little bit of a delay in what you're seeing, but I have given you the sample test with that blue and white screen that I've shown you, and hopefully it'll pop up any minute so that you can actually see it. That is exactly what the GED looks like. It is very rare that a student will be able to get an accommodation to take the GED test outside of a computer. What's happening now is that, here we go, I think you can see it now. This is exactly what the GED looks like. It's done in a more secure environment. They do not take the test online, but they do register through GED.com online. They need to pay for their test through GED.com online. It is $32 per test. There are 4 tests, so it is $128 total. And then once they register online to take a test, they will choose a certified testing site. So there are, if you are in the Central Florida area, there is a certified testing site at Seminole State College, at the West Side campus of Orange Technical College, who I work for, which is in Winter Garden, and at the Mid Florida campus of Orange Technical College, which is on John Young and Oak Ridge in South Orlando. So those are the 3 locations in Central Florida that they will have to go to. It is 100% computer based, so students really need to adapt to being able to use a computer. Now, students don't have to be computer wizards because the test is pretty simple. I mean, it's got a next button, a previous button, and there's not a tremendous amount of buttons for them to click on, but they do need to be able to read on a computer and definitely read those math problems on the computer. Okay, I've got another question here. I hope that answered your question, David. If you have any more questions, please let me know. What percent of recent high school graduates passed the GED? The test, after it was released in 2014, was norm referenced. Now, I do not know exactly the percentage. I haven't seen that data lately. They did release it, but they released it like in 2015, so I'm not sure that's still relevant. But this is what I can tell you about the percentage of high school graduates that have passed. They normed the test against high school students, and due to their scores, I can tell you that they have lowered the passing score on the GED. You used to, for example, need 150 points to pass the GED test, and now you only need 145 points. And that transition was based upon the success of high school graduates taking this test. That is also the reason why when the GED first came out, GED testing service was saying you needed 75% of questions answered correctly to pass the test. I can tell you that it is definitely not near that. Based upon all the data that we've looked at with students in the classroom taking GED practice tests, including the practice tests like the sample test that I'm showing on the screen right now, which is made by GED testing service, there is no way that students are scoring 75% on these tests. My graduates are probably scoring anywhere from 60 to 70% on the reading, science, or social studies test. I'm sorry, I always say reading. It's called reasoning through language arts. The reasoning through language arts, science, or social studies test, which are all reading tests, they just really need to be able to know how to read and answer questions. I think 60 to 70% is somewhere in the passing percentage rate. And for the math, again, my prediction is that it's probably somewhere in the 30% range, which is because they have normed it against high school students, and they did not do that well on it because of the complexity of these questions, which if you take the sample test, you will see them. When I took I've been teaching Algebra 1 for 10 years. This is my subject. This is my #1 subject. And when I took the math practice test for the first time, I was blown away by the complexity of some of the questions because they layered so many skills together. So I always share that with my students and tell them, listen, I'm a math teacher. It's hard for me. I know it's going to be hard for you. You have to just accept that this is a hard test and you have to get over it. And I just need you to go there. I need you to read, and I need you to answer the questions or make your best guess. And you just encourage courage Just encourage them to be courageous and go do the test. Okay, next question. Do you have a list of good resources for those of us that have to use under the door ready materials? I'm not exactly sure what that means, Robert. If you can clarify that. If you mean materials that can be just printed and used immediately, then I would say the CUDA Software.com and commoncoresheets.com is going to have 1 million worksheets that you can just print and use. If that doesn't answer your question and you want to, okay, I work in a prison. Oh my gosh. Okay, I didn't see that coming, Robert. Okay, but again, my answer is the same. You can print the worksheets from CUDA Software and from Common Core Sheets. And Robert, if you will email me with that same question, I just found this awesome website of this math teacher that basically, he gives these notes. He just basically typed out these math notes, and then they have little practice questions to go with them. And I will send you that website if you can just email me about that, because I think that'd be great, because you can then just pass, it'd be like passing a mini book under the door to your student that has kind of notes and practice to go with it. So if you can just email me, I will be happy to email you that website, because I just found it and I really enjoyed it, and I think that'd be good for you. If you could just email me that question and I will get back to you almost immediately. Okay, are there mobile apps for practice testing? I actually have seen a student use these sample tests on their phone. So I actually think that you can access this website. GED Practice Test.com is another one. And there's also a bunch of GED apps that my students have used. I'm not sure if I list them on the mobile apps list, but David, if you want to email me that question, I will email you back with a couple specific apps. I cannot remember the name of the one that I really like off the top of my head, but I can get it for you. Okay, let me just make sure. Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure I'm answering all these questions. Robert, do the worksheets have step-by-step? In the math notes, I do. They do have the step-by-step, so you'll get that if you email me. Yeah, Billy, you're asking me if I can email you the same link. I'm going to try to see if I can find this really quickly, if I can remember, because I might be able to just show you guys really quickly if I can find this. Here it is, Hanlon Math. So I just
copy paste in the chat box too, Rebecca. Don't forget. Okay,
sure. I'll put it in the chat box, but I can also, if you can see there, it's Hanlon, Hanlon Math. I'm going to paste this in the chat. And if you email me, I can also email it to you. But this website, this guy has all these different printable note sheets and practice questions. So I found a bunch of his practice stuff on here, so you might find a lot of stuff that you'll really like in here. So that is the website that I'm talking about. Okay, so any of those of you that are looking for those printable things with notes, again, I've just posted that in the chat pod, that website, but it's also on your screen, is Hanlon, Hanlon math.com. And he's got some pretty cool resources in here. It appears to me that he is selling something, but I found that he had a lot of things. So I just clicked under resources, and he had like these notes when you clicked on some of these sections. So I would say just click around through this website and you're going to find, like here's a review booklet. You're going to find some things in here that he had printed. So here's an example. He just kind of types out these notes and he gives examples, and then they can be printed. And then the way that I really discovered this guy is I was looking for a integers review, and I found this packet that he made that was like 20 pages long of practice questions. So I thought that was pretty cool. But you can see, hopefully if the screen is coming through correctly, you can see how this guy just basically creates notes. So he's got a bunch in there, and that may be useful to a lot of you to just print and distribute. Okay, any more questions before we wrap? I think we're doing good. I'm going to throw my email up on the screen one more time. And if you should have any questions in the future, please do reach out. I will help you as much as I possibly can. I love to work with other teachers, and it was my absolute pleasure to be here today with you. I hope you enjoyed it and learned a couple things. Let me know if you need anything else in the future. And I just want to give a quick shout out to Florida Literacy for hosting this website for us. They are an awesome company that I've worked with a lot, and I've always enjoyed working with the Florida Literacy Coalition, and now they've developed that math resource web pages, so please do check those out because I think they'd be great for you and your students. If that is it and there's no more questions, I just want to say have a great day.
Thank you all. Don't forget about the survey coming to you tomorrow in your email. And I also actually included the link that Rebecca just showed us. I'll be including that in the email as well, just to shoot out to everyone because it seemed like there was enough people who wanted that. So, all right, and I think that's going to be all. Thank you all for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your week. Goodbye.